Hey there and welcome back to another Avatar video. And recently, probably spurred on by the recent discussion about whether a live action adaptation of Avatar The Last Airbender is really necessary, I've been thinking a lot about the animated shows and the impact they've had. When The Last Airbender released, at least for me, and I think for many others honestly, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. Something new and fresh, that stood apart from other Western cartoons, celebrating and highlighting various different cultures that I think never really gets shown all that often in westernized media. So already, it had done something that few other cartoons of its time had done before. But then beyond that, it opened itself up to audiences of all ages and demographics, blurring the lines between mature and children's entertainment as it tackled a number of dark and heavy topics, such as war, genocide, colonialism, racism, dictatorships, child abuse, family violence, sexism and gender empowerment, indoctrination, death and spirituality, PTSD and other mental health issues. And that's just the original animated series. The extended universe via the graphic novels include heaps of other dark plot points, like forced marriage, marital sexual assault, and being forced to bear children against your consent. And I mean, Jesus, those are some dark topics for a kids show. But like I said, the series has all of that, whilst also infusing it with classic teen issues like puberty, crushes, depression, found family, dating, flirting, and all the cringy goodness that comes with growing up. And hell, on top of that, it was an early champion of diversity, with female characters having great importance, no character being white, and including blind and paraplegic characters. They really just fired on all cylinders. And I think the world at large really took notice of this way of telling stories, and just of the quality of this series in general. For one, I mean, the critical and audience scores are insane, and it's considered as one of the best shows of all time, sitting at a cool 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, as well as garnering a huge viewership on cable TV when it aired, and developing a tremendous cult following in the years that followed, with a huge amount of discussion surrounding the show to this day, over 17 years since it first debuted. And hell, I mean, when it was added to Netflix in 2020, it surged to the top as the most watched show within days, and stayed there for months, acquiring a new audience with a new generation due to the universally applicable nature of its themes and its story. It spawned graphic novels and comics, video games, tabletop RPGs, bad film adaptations, and now even that live action adaptation. Basically, this thing was a cash cow, and they cashed in big time. But there was still more to milk out of this thing, more money to be made. Because only a few years later they unleashed The Legend of Korra, which picks up 70 years after the events of Avatar The Last Airbender and follows the character of Korra, the Avatar following Aang, as she grapples with a world in the midst of its industrial revolution and deals with many of the same socio-political themes that were covered in the original series, whilst also adding a whole host of new ones, like spirituality versus secularism, terrorism, insurgency, weapons of mass destruction and the ethics surrounding their use, as well as even more glorious teenage angst. But I think the biggest takeaway from The Legend of Korra was its continued championing of issues relating to gender, race, and sexual orientation. But really, specifically sexual orientation, because they actually went and broke down barriers and put an LGBT relationship on screen between the main characters, Korra and Asami, in a time where that sort of diversity and inclusivity was considered a more controversial choice for children's TV. And whilst they didn't go super hard at it, and only had them staring lovingly at each other to end the show whilst holding hands, much like Aang and Katara at the end of The Last Airbender, it was still a big step up from what a lot of people had expected to see. And once again, the franchise paved the way for queer representation in animated content going forward, providing a basis of inspiration for shows like She-Ra and The Dragon Prince. And much like Avatar The Last Airbender, The Legend of Korra managed to captivate a whole generation once again, being critically acclaimed and winning awards, as well as having very, very decent ratings. Whilst I don't think it really ascended to the level of popularity that The Last Airbender enjoyed at the height of its popularity, it still cultivated a huge following, and is still looked back on fondly today. Although, on the other hand, this is definitely where we start to see a bit of pushback that basically all the voice cast for Asian characters were white, and that it was almost solely created by white people with minimal input from those ethnic groups that they were using as the basis for their world building and cultures. Which, in my view, sort of paved the way for the live action series being made, where it's much more diverse. And that's a good thing. But let's get back on track, because aside from the graphic novels and the comics, the final season of Legend of Korra was the last time we saw this world on screen for a number of years. And hell, I even remember at one point them saying that they were full stop not going to do any more. And at the time, I did scoff at that. And I vividly remember ranting about how they were leaving money on the table and that at the very least, they need to do 2 more series. One for a Fire Nation avatar and one for an Earth Kingdom avatar. To me, that would have made the show go full circle and closed off that chapter in TV history quite nicely. And so, when we came to the announcement of Avatar Studios in February 2021, I was rather excited. And for those that don't know, Avatar Studios is a new division of Nickelodeon centered on developing animated series and films set in the Avatar universe. And by God, I was hyped by all of this. More Avatar content? Yes, please. And I mean, it seems like they were going to make quite a lot of it too. As if they were only going to make 1 or 2 more installments, why would they create a whole new division for that? They clearly still have big plans for the franchise going forward. And honestly, I think I am still mostly excited. I think. I mean, as long as they do bother to address the criticism that people have surrounding the makeup of the creative team for The Legend of Korra and start to use a more diverse cast, instead of for some reason using white actors to portray people of Asian and North American descent, then I think I'll be happy. But beyond addressing those concerns, I'm also a little bit nervous from a creative point of view, because ultimately, it seems like they're trying to set up one big cinematic universe tying in the shows and the books, and now even more content in their new series and films. And I just can't help but wonder, at what point will the story fatigue set in? At what point are we going to get bored of seeing fairly similar landscapes and worlds? When are they going to have mined all they can from this franchise? And how far into the future of the world is it going to go? How far is too far? I mean, yes, I think there's a wealth of content to explore from a prequel point of view, but do they want to go backwards? Do they want to show us the air nomads at their peak? Or the early Fire Nation? The Southern Water Tribe before its fall into decay and subsequent rise during the Industrial Age? Or are they going to keep pushing through the Industrial Era stuff and move into a more modern day context? And honestly, I have little to no interest in that. It just feels too alien for my tastes. But it's a question that really does need asking. Where do they go from here? And I am excited, but I'm also nervous in equal measure. But as always, those are just my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the Avatar franchise? Like it, hate it, excited for more? Or do you think we should let sleeping dogs lie, not make more? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.